The soft amber light of early evening spilled over a quiet residential road in the city of Havenbrook. A sleek, obsidian-colored Zephyr LX drifted down the lane with quiet elegance, its engine purring against the pavement. Behind the wheel sat Camille Jordan, a black woman in her early 40s, calm, composed, and sharply dressed in a charcoal gray pantsuit. Everything about her presence hinted at quiet command. The classical piano music humming from the speakers matched her mood, reflective, steady, and reserved. She was heading home from a demanding day as Deputy Chief of Operations for the National Investigations Bureau, a post that required both poise and power. But tranquility gave way to tension as a flicker of red and blue suddenly lit up her rearview mirror. A local cruiser had latched onto her, its siren giving a sharp, unnecessary wail. Camille's brows drew together. She had obeyed the speed limit and signaled every turn. Still, with practiced discipline, she guided the car to the curb, switched off the music, cracked the window, and waited. She'd been trained in de-escalation. Now it was time to use that training. Two officers stepped out. One older and burly, with a permanent scowl and sun-leathered skin, Sergeant Hank Brody. Trailing him was a much younger cop, Officer Kyle Brinks, lean, twitchy, and grinning like this was some game. Brody nudged Brinks, muttering loud enough for Camille to hear. Black lady in a ride like that? Yeah, that's worth a look. Brinks laughed. Might be our next bonus round. Brody sauntered up to the window. Evening. You were moving kind of quick for this stretch. Camille looked him in the eye. I was well within the posted limit. Can I ask what your radar said I was doing? License and registration, he replied curtly, dodging the question. Without a word, Camille handed over the paperwork. She'd long learned when silence spoke louder than protest. Brody eyed the documents, then peered inside the vehicle. Camille Jordan, he read aloud. That's a fancy name. What kind of job gets you a car like this? My profession has no bearing on this stop, she said flatly. Again, may I ask what speed you clocked me at? Brody shrugged. Tint looks darker than allowed. Driving alone at this hour in this neighborhood? That's suspicious. My window tint is legal. If there's no infraction, I'd like my documents returned. Brody leaned closer, dropping his voice. Look, we can make this go away. You scratch our back. We skip the paperwork. He rubbed his fingers together in a crude signal. Brinks stood back, trying and failing to look uninvolved. Camille's face tightened. Let me be crystal clear. I won't be bribing you. If you're writing a citation, do it. If not, give me back my license. What you're doing is intimidation, abuse of authority, and racially motivated harassment. Brody's eyes flared. Think you're smart? Probably some overpriced escort or running dope. Or both, Brinks chimed in, sneering. Camille's grip on the wheel didn't loosen. I want a commanding officer, and I'm calling legal counsel. Brody barked, out of the car. You're under arrest. For what exactly? Camille asked, voice sharp but even. Resisting, causing a scene, whatever I decide, Brody snapped. Brinks flung the door open and hauled her out. She didn't struggle, knowing it would give them what they wanted. But her voice cut through the night. This arrest is unlawful. Cuffs tightened on her wrists as they shoved her into the back of their cruiser. She stared straight ahead, her face unreadable. But inside, she was cataloging everything. Names, badge numbers, timestamps. They always get tough until booking, Brinks joked as they drove. Let's see if she cries. They had no idea who was in that car. At the precinct, a squat building with chipped paint and flickering lights, Brody pulled her inside and dropped her paperwork on the front desk. A graying officer behind the counter, Sergeant Milo Travers, glanced up. What's the charge? He asked, unimpressed. Resisting, disorderly. Pick your poison, Brody said. Travers squinted at the ID. Camille Jordan? He paused. Something about the name clicked. Occupation? Camille raised her chin. Deputy Chief, National Investigations Bureau. Silence slammed into the room. Travers froze, blinking at the screen. Brody went pale. Brinks staggered back a step. Oh, hell, Brody mumbled. Brinks dropped his radio. We didn't know. Please, ma'am. Camille didn't flinch. Sergeant, I want these cuffs off. Then call your superior. Then call my agency. Travers fumbled to obey. Within moments, phones rang off desks, calls to HQ, to the city council, to the bureau's local field office. Agents began arriving before the clock hit the next hour. Statements were taken. Footage was pulled. Everything the officers had done was laid bare. Brody and Brinks were immediately relieved of duty and isolated pending investigation. Turns out, Brody already had a stack of complaints: racial harassment, threats, extortion. Brinks wasn't far behind. Charges followed fast: misuse of authority, coercion, wrongful arrest, civil rights violations. The trial drew national media. Camille testified calmly, recounting every detail with precision. The courtroom listened in stunned silence. The verdict was unanimous: guilty on all charges. Each officer was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. The judge called it a dark abuse of public trust and made an example of them. Camille walked out of that courthouse unchanged on the outside, but sharper, stronger. Her case sparked change: new training protocols, internal audits, oversight boards. Civil rights groups called a milestone. But for Camille Jordan, it wasn't victory. It was the start of a longer road. She went home that night under a sky drained of color, but her resolve burned hot beneath her calm surface. No title, no badge, no uniform gives anyone the right to abuse their power. And she would never stop fighting to make sure no one forgot that. As the dust settled and the headlines began to fade, Camille Jordan knew this wasn't the end. It was just one skirmish in a much larger war. The courtroom might have delivered justice in the eyes of the law, but justice, she understood, wasn't just about punishment. It was about change. Real, systemic, uncomfortable change. And change doesn't come quietly. In the weeks that followed, Camille became a name people whispered and shouted in equal measure. Her story rippled through precincts, city halls, state legislatures. Some saw her as a symbol of resistance. Others saw her as a threat to the status quo. Either way, she had their attention, and she was going to use it. She didn't ask for the spotlight. She didn't want fame, but she wasn't going to waste the platform she now had. She began speaking at community town halls, meeting with reform advocates, and pushing for deeper policy changes, ones that went beyond PR-friendly gestures. Mandatory body cams weren't enough. Training seminars weren't enough. There had to be teeth behind accountability. There had to be a system that didn't just punish officers when they got caught, but one that stopped them before they acted. Behind the scenes, she started building something more permanent. A task force within the National Investigations Bureau, one focused specifically on civil rights abuses tied to law enforcement. It wasn't about painting every officer as corrupt. Camille had worked with too many good ones to fall into that trap. But she also knew silence protects predators, and unchecked power only grows more dangerous. The same street where she had been pulled over weeks ago now looked different. Not physically, but every time she drove it, she remembered the feeling. The tightening in her chest, the calculation behind every word she spoke, and the terrifying knowledge that even her badge, her title, her career, none of it could shield her in that moment. She thought about the people who didn't have her resources, her training, or her reach. The ones who were pulled over and never made it home. Their names haunted her. Their stories fueled her. Camille wasn't fighting for revenge. She was fighting for the next person, so they wouldn't have to fight at all. And so, with each sunrise, she rose with it. Steady, unflinching, committed. Not because she had to, but because power unchecked is injustice guaranteed. And she had seen enough to know silence was never an option again.